Now I'm going to give you some questions to ask yourself when you're writing a novel. Now these are about you, and the reason I'm asking you these questions and for you to dig into yourself to answer them is because I want you to feel like your character. In answering these and thinking through these, you will know how to infuse some of this emotion into your characters. So let's start with a few of them. What makes your blood boil? What makes you absolutely furious? Define that. Or think about an instance where you just lost it. You were so angry. Okay, now, how can you use that for your character? How can you take that moment, redefine it a little bit, and put that in your story? What are you very desperate to protect? What in your world, if it was yanked away from you, would drive you insane? What would you fiercely protect that is yours right now? Most of the time it's our family. Well, if that's the case, throw danger to the family in the story. Whatever it is, think about what that does to you. And if you think hard enough, you'll raise your own blood pressure. And that's what I want you to feel. What makes you angry? What makes you deathly afraid? And what makes you impotently frustrated? What would stop you in your shoes with you not being able to make a decision? If something came at you, what would make you just freeze? On the deathly afraid, what's your phobia? What is your phobia? Mine is dark water. As much as I love my state of South Carolina, I can't swim in the lakes, I can't swim in the ocean. And it goes back to a childhood situation. But I love being around them, but I'm deathly afraid to put a foot in them. So, in Tidewater Murder, guess what scene I put in there? I put my character deathly afraid of dark water, then I threw her on her boat, and I threw her out into the ocean, and then I sank the boat. So, you talk about a fun scene to write, I could tap those emotions big time. So that's what I'm trying to get you to do, is define those types of things and use them. What drives you to a hostile confrontation? I mean, what would make you go all postal on somebody? Really, think about it. And you do have moments. We all like to think that we're nice and civilized and we don't do these things. We've all gone nuts. What would make you lie? Or as a minimum, embellish the truth? And we may all say, I don't lie, I don't believe in lying. Yes, you would. Yes, you would. Everybody lies, especially when the stakes are high. What would make you deceive yourself? What makes you not want to accept the truth, not to accept what's going on in your world? What puts you into denial? Think about that. What would make you manipulate somebody else? What would be so critical that you would actually take advantage of someone else in order to get your way because the goal was just that important? And what can you obsess over? What do you call your obsession? I mean, it might be simple video games. What is your obsession that you have trouble putting down? There may be a gambling issue. There may be a drinking issue. There may be obsessing over certain members of your family that you would just soon not have around during Thanksgiving. And it drives you nuts to the point you don't enjoy Thanksgiving. What are your obsessions? Think deep and hard over your past year as to what clicked in your head that you couldn't quit thinking about. So you see, I'm trying to get you to dig into these emotions so that you feel them at such a visceral level that you can tap that and put it into your book. There was a scene in my recent book that's just coming out. I'm really holding my breath over. I wrote it, I took a big risk in sending the story in this direction. Sent it to my publisher, halfway expecting for them to go, we're not buying it, we don't like it. Instead, they came back and went, wow, this is, how'd they put it? They were intrigued, but they were also touched by it. It tapped their emotions, which is what I wanted. I didn't want them to get mad about it or think it made it less marketable. Instead, they said it made it highly marketable, and they loved it. And I will tell you, when I wrote that scene, it was extremely difficult, because when you're in a series and you know all these players, they're family to you after a while, because you get into their heads so much. To the point I was writing a scene and crying. Okay, and it's part of the reason I write in the middle of the night when everybody else is asleep. But that's what I want you to be able to do. And I sent that chapter to my critique group and waited to hear back from them. And 3 out of 4 of them said it made them tear up. Yes, that's a yes moment. And that's what I want you to do. And you can't do that without tapping when you have cried, and when you were hurt, and when you were angry. So if you can tap into that, your characters can too. So that's what I want you to get into. And that's part of plotting, is when you've got these plot moments that I've already had you define, these fun little scenes you wrote, how deep can you get emotionally in those scenes too? So let's switch to point of view, since we're trying to get tighter in with these characters and make them emotional. A lot hinges on point of view. There's so many levels of points of view. I'm just going to get very, very basic and give you 3 main ones, because if you're a new writer, you should not probably stray outside of these 3 until you get your writing legs under you. 1, first person. That's you becoming the character. I, me, my, our, all of that is first person. And a lot of mysteries are written that way. My first mystery series is written in first person. It's intimate. The dialogue in the character's head is very natural. You've got instant reactions to everything. It's like real time, because you're writing as the character. And so you feel it quicker, you react quicker. It's an easier writing to me for a new author. Some teachers will say it's more difficult. There is a challenge to it, because your character has to always be present for whatever happens, or at least get the information firsthand. And in a mystery, that's difficult because the clues and the crimes don't always occur in her presence. So you have to get very creative in how you do the plot, because you can't have somebody else see it, think it, and do it without thinking, how's she going to know? So that makes first person tricky. But it is a more natural way of writing when you're trying to get into a character's head. Then you've got third person close. That is a kissing cousin to first person. Third person, of course, is he, she, they. You're not saying I, me, my. I did my second series in third person close. When you're writing it, it feels almost like first person, but you're not doing it as the character. You're doing it outside the character. Most of your books are written in third person. And a good many of them now, it's very trendy in contemporary literature to write in first person close, because the readers are looking for escapism, and the best way to escape is to be the character. So it's either first person or third person close. There are some stories that are third person distance, and it's where I'd have to say, if I'm going to go to Lord of the Rings, I'd say it was probably third person distance. There is some first person in there. I don't want to use that. He danced all over the place. Third person distant, you're the narrator, and you may not get as deeply into their head. That means you're going to have to do a ton more showing in your writing. But third person distant is probably the third choice when you come to writing. I could go into omniscient, I could go into a second person, a lot of things that are rarely used and used well. They take a whole lot of talent and a lot of maturity as a writer. I won't even go there, because I don't suggest that if this is your first, second, or even third book. A scene has more wow, a book has more wow if the reader can get in the head of the person. The reader should feel like the character. So that's where voice comes into play. I had trouble switching series, because you do a lot of world building in a series. You have some characters that repeat, a lot of the setting is the same. Readers love a series. They want to be able to come back and drop right into it and run. And when you change series, you're changing worlds. So my Carolina Slade series was first person. It worked great. It made the humor pop off the page. So when I changed to my Edisto series and had a whole new world, a whole new set of characters, I struggled writing it in first person because I kept falling back into the first world. So I changed it to third person close. And luckily, after 3 novels being published, I was mature enough to pull it off well. And as a matter of fact, I'm now more comfortable in third person close than I am first person. So when I go back to write the 4th, in the first series, I'm going to have to remember back. Voice, point of view makes such a huge difference in how you tell your story. So stop and think hard about it. When I wrote my first novel, I wrote it in third person twice before I threw it away and rewrote it in first person. It made a world of difference. I didn't sell it until I changed it to first person. So try it both ways. Try first and third. You won't know until you try it. And I promise you, one will actually flow a lot easier than the other. You'll find what's more natural. It's always tempting to use multiple points of view. It's very tempting to, when you're getting information from a character, that you make that scene in his point of view. Then you wind up with 12 characters, 12 points of view, and the reader gets tired of it. It turns into head hopping. When a reader picks up a story, and think of yourself as a reader now, put on your reader hat, and you pick up a story, you want to be invested in that story. You want to fall into this world. You want to feel like you're in it. You want to be in that character's head. So if chapter 1 is your main character, you get invested in the story and the mission, and then you go to chapter 2, and there's another character. You might go, okay, well, this must be an important character. I'll now invest in this one as well. And then if you jump to chapter 3 and there's a third person, you see you're going to start wearing down the reader because they don't know who to follow, who to trust, who's the important plot, who is this theme centered around. That's where your theme is going to come back into play. You need to know who is the most important, who has the most to risk. If they've read this character, and then there's a second character, and there's a third character, I can tell you, by the time they get to a 4th character, you throw a 4th character at them, you're going to have some readers close the book. So be very, very careful when you use multiple points of view. Never use them in the same scene. That is definitely head hopping. Try not to use them in the same chapter. You've got to be very, very good at what you do to pull that off. So be careful. I would suggest, if you're writing your first book, 1 point of view, 2 at the max. Outliner or pantser, I've covered this just a little bit. A pantser means that you don't like to outline. An outliner means that you like intricate outlines. Now there's everything in between. That's opposite ends of the spectrum. When I write, I will outline. I have my premise, I have my theme, I have all of that when I sit down to start a new book, but I will outline 3 chapters. The reason being is I know the crime, I know the character, I'm setting at the stage, I know where I'm going. But by the end of chapter 3, I'm starting solving the crime and raising the tension and throwing in the obstacles. I may suddenly have a revelation in writing chapter 2 that's going to send me in a different direction. I have tried outlining and I wind up throwing probably 3/4 of it away because the book turned out nothing like I outlined. But that is me. That is me. There's a lot of successful authors out there who outline to the nth degree. 50-page outlines. But what that does is when they sit down to write, they know where they're going and they write fast. That is wonderful. I wish I could do that. You will tend, just because of how you're wired mentally, to fall in one camp or the other, and there's no right or wrong to it. Tony Hillerman, who wrote all those westerns, dozens and dozens of them, of westerns that have a lot of mystery to them, didn't believe in outlining. He said you can get away with being a pantser if you are very familiar with your setting, you're very comfortable with the mystery that needs solving, you're very sure of your theme, you're very comfortable with your characters, and when you have a series you can reach that point. Everything moves effortlessly when you write. It means you have written enough stories and thrown away enough words, written enough novels to where your mind falls into place as to what comes next. That comes with several books. So you can reach a point of being a pantser if everything moves effortlessly. It usually doesn't happen for a minimum of 2 to 3 books. So keep that in mind. Just because you're an outliner now doesn't mean that you won't be a pantser 4 books down the road. Some people argue that outlining, or predestination, if you want to call it that, can stifle creativity. I'm in that camp. But not outlining can lead you to a lot of dead ends. You can start down this path writing your story because you don't have an outline. You're just going wherever you think it needs to go or where the character seems to tell you it needs to go, and reaching in and realize, well, that's not going to help me get over here. And you've got to back up and regroup and write another chapter. So pantser writing is slower writing because it's trial and error. Outlining is more precise. It takes a long time to outline, but the writing part goes a lot quicker. Decide whatever you like. There is some software out there called Scrivener, and there's a few others, but Scrivener seems to be the software of preference for most writers. It's an inexpensive software. It's, I think, not on sale, $40 to $50. And it is purely for writing, and it can serve both the outliner and the pantser. It has tools to allow you to go either way. It even has visual tools so that you can have a pretend cork board with index cards with all those cool scenes you wrote, and now you have to put in the right order. So it's marvelous software. If you like software to help you along, that is one highly recommended. So regardless of how you do all this, define your goals. That means the goal of your main character, the goal of your bad guy. Your secondary characters have goals. A lot of times we don't think about the sidekicks and the assistants and the Watsons to the Sherlock Holmes. They have goals as well. They wouldn't be in the story unless they were adding something to the story. When you have secondaries in there, they have missions as well. They may be this big, but if you took them out, the story would feel short. They need to be needed. Don't put secondary characters in just because you think it's more colorful. They need to add to the progression of the story and add to the plot. If they don't, yank them out, because the story needs to keep moving. If you put somebody in there that doesn't add to, say, solving the crime or pursuing the plot, they're just bogging it down. They're slowing it down. What is your chapter goal? You sit down to write a chapter, what's your goal? When you open here and in here, what ground do you hope to gain along that journey? What is your point? What do you want to do in that chapter? You can take it down further. When you have a scene, you might have 2 or 3 scenes in a chapter. What is the point of that scene? What is a one-liner point to you writing that scene? So you may not outline, but at least have a goal to each chapter and each scene. Know all of your major decisions and turning points in the story. Remember, I had you write those cool scenes again, those major points that we defined. When you have those, they help you see the turning points in the story. When I cover characterization, you'll see more of what I'm talking about. So let's open your book. Let's sit down and let's start writing that first chapter. What do you have to make sure is in that first chapter? First, your protagonist has to be likable. They can be a pain in the butt. They can be quirky. They might not be somebody you'd want to be good friends with, but they have to be likable to the point you want to get on this train with them and take that journey. So it could just be somebody that's quirky. It's like Inspector Poirot. I don't know if you that's Agatha Christie. He's irritating as heck because he's a know-it-all. However, he's brilliant. So you want to see how he's going to put these things together and make them work. You want to place your protagonist in her setting to show sense of place. Even if your setting is not key to your story, you still need to orient the reader to the place where this book is going to operate. They need to feel like they're grounded. Where are they planting their feet for this story? You need to show the protagonist driving the plot, not just something happening to them. Yes, something needs to happen. It needs to be unexpected, of course, but you have to have some mental processes with them as to what they think they're going to do about this or what's happening with them. Show a problem. It doesn't have to be the problem, but there needs to be a problem that needs to be solved. Nothing says that that problem can't lead to another one that leads to the big, big problem that has to be solved. Start with action. You don't have to blow something up and you don't have to drop a body, but you do need to have action. It can't be people just talking. It can't be people dreaming. That's a big no-no. It can't be people waking up in the morning and wondering how their day's going to be, and then they go have breakfast, and by the end of the chapter, they suddenly realize, wait a minute, nobody's home, everybody's disappeared off the planet, and what do I do? You need action to start earlier. When people pick up a book, they open that first page, and the critical reader will want to be sucked in on the first page. Any agent is going to want to be sucked in on the first page, and if possible, sucked in the first paragraph. There needs to be obvious conflict, mental as well as physical. It doesn't need just to be somebody shooting at somebody. You need the mental processes going on in that as well. 99% of the time you need to open with your main character. So the reason I say that is because you don't want to deceive the reader. You open a story, and if it happens to be somebody other than the main character, then you're going to do a head-hopping jolt to the reader when they actually meet the main character. So be very, very careful. A lot of writers fall into a trap of thinking they need a prologue. And actually, I think 90% of the prologues out there are totally unnecessary. It just takes better writing, a little more thought process to the writing to take what happened in that prologue and infuse it in your story creatively. A lot of times they think, especially the bad guy, needs to be introduced into the prologue when he commits his crime, off stage, so to speak, from the protagonist. So you don't want, you got the bad guy there and you're entering his world and you've got all this information. That's the prologue. Then you go to chapter 1 and we're in a new world. We're in a new setting. You might even be in a new time zone. You don't want to jerk the reader around too much on that. A lot of times we want to put history in that prologue thinking, well, they need to know the background. Actually, readers are a lot more sophisticated than you think. They don't need all that background, or snippets of that background can be infused in dialogue and reactions and incidences throughout the story to just totally negate the need for that prologue. So what do you do when your story stalls? You're writing and you feel like you're going nowhere and it's boring to write. And trust me, if it's boring for you to write, it's boring for anybody else to read. So you've got to step back and go, wait a minute, is my character motivated? Are they driven? Do they still have this yearning, this passion, this something inside of them that's driving them forward to keep going forward? Or have they given up, changed their mind, or they're just slogging along and whatever happens, they tend to go in that direction? What you've done there is that you have lost the character and picked up on the plot. You're letting the plot drive the character instead of the character pushing the plot. That sounds easy, sounds simple to fix, but you can so slide into the wrong one quickly. So when you think your character is just wandering around, it means they've lost their drive and lost their momentum and forgotten their goals. Go back and change that. It's that simple. You've already defined them. They need to be driving the story, not the other way around. Are the stakes gone? Suddenly the stakes are gone. They've solved everything, or the stakes just weren't really that important, or they weren't that risky. Nobody was going to die, nobody's going to get hurt, there's no big issues. There should always be issues. There should always be something hanging. Even if your character solves one issue, it should cause a worse one. So that's what you want to do in a story. That's what a reader's hunting for. They don't want things to be fixed, not until the end, not until everything has just fallen apart and seems unfixable. Does the character come around and fix it? Has your subplot taken over? I mentioned before, you've got the story plot, you've got the character's plot. You might even have some secondary characters with their own subplots. You can get complicated and have 3, 4, 5 levels in a story. Has one of those subplots with a character risen up and taken over the main one? It's really easy to do, especially if it gets emotional or sentimental, or it's something that's fun to write. You'll find a character that's very, very fun to write. I have a secondary character I'd much rather write than my primary, but I have to rein in that she doesn't take over things. So you gotta watch that. So now I'm going to give you some types of plotting. They boil down to the same thing, but I want you to have some resources if you want to go out and read them in intricate detail. The most common is the basic 3-act structure. Okay, you've got a setup, rising action with all your stakes, and a resolution. So it's just simple. You got the problem, there's the journey to fix it, all kinds of little obstacles, resolution. 3-act journey, okay? Then you've got what we all learned in English class sooner or later, the hero's journey. That is a 17-step process of a mythical creature on an adventure. I had a little problem with all the 17 steps whenever I tried to use it on one of my stories. I tend to fall back on the 3-act structure or one of these others I'm going to talk about. But the hero's journey is very, very good at making you dissect your story. And if you are an outliner, it's superb. So it allows you to actually just line out your steps, and before long you realize you're setting up your chapters and you've got an outline before it's over with. You can take the 17-step hero's journey and outline your book. So that one I strongly suggest for those people who write on that type of linear method. 6-stage plot structure. It's a more detailed version of the 3-act. It really is. It's 6 critical elements. And you can find several books on the basic 6-stage plot structure. It tends to branch off of playwriting. You'll find a lot of outlining and a lot of plotting spins off of screenplays and playwriting. Save the Cat structure. That one's created by Blake Snyder, a screenwriter, and he developed a format using 15 turning points in your story. That one's also excellent if you're an outliner. And then I've added one called the Stephen James Way. He wrote a book. Stephen James is a remarkable storyteller. This is a man who's got multiple degrees in storytelling. And when he speaks, you can't not listen. It's just amazing. He writes the same way. As a result, he teaches writing, and writers flock to his classes. He has a book, if you can't make it to his classes, he has a book called Story Trumps Structure. What he tries to do is take the writer out of the 3 acts, 6 acts, 17 steps, get you out of all of that linear rules, steps, got to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just make you see that the story itself trumps any kind of structure you try to do. Obviously, he tends to be more of a pantser, would be my guess. However, you read that book and you realize it's all about nothing but tension, just raising the tension on every single page and fleshing out your character. And if you're continually doing those things, you are writing the story. It's a great book. It's a great book, especially when you're starting out. So what I want you to understand, I'm going to cover the basic 3-act structure because everything falls back into it. That's the bones of any kind of plotting. And I want to give you an idea. If I had a dry erase board, I'd be scribbling all over it right now. I want you to know that Act 1, the setup consists of the following. It's your first 25% of your story. Just know that. Your first 25%. You're going to have an opening scene. I think we already know that. You get to know the players, the world involved, that something happens, and you like the protagonist. You're just setting the stage. The inciting event. Something happens to rock that world and to rock that character. The character is uncertain whether or not to get involved. If you stop and think about all the books you've read, when something happens to that main character, they don't jump up and go, I'll fix this. You know, they don't. They go, not my problem. Half the time, they are second guessing whether or not they should even be involved. They actually will make justifications as to, no, I'll just make it worse. No, not my problem. No, this is not how I was raised. This is not how I think. All kinds of excuses. That's your inner conflict working. And you're fleshing out your character to the reader by doing that. You want them to second guess and have problems with accepting what's going on with this inciting event. It gives a window also to the core of that character as to what their flaws are and what their needs are. By their thought processes in handling this situation, it introduces the reader to what makes that character tick. So then you have, in that setup, a realization that the inciting event is going to change the character's life. They can't walk away from it without it changing their life. They can't accept it and embrace it without it changing their life. We hate change. Humanity hates change. So when we're confronted with something that we know is going to remove everything we know and take us through a journey that's going to drop us off in a place that will never be the same, we're hesitant to get into it. And that is what your event has to do in this first 25% of the book, is put that character through her paces and her mental processes to the point where she's got to decide, I got to do this. It's going to be worse if I don't, but I really still don't want to do it because I don't like where it may end up. Uncertainty. And your Act 1 problem. By the end of that 25%, your character has to set a goal, make a choice, and take a first step. That does not mean they know what they're doing. It means that they have decided to move forward, not put their head in the sand. And that in itself is a challenge. They have to choose to proceed and step outside their comfort zone. Their future has to be very unfamiliar. And this is going to launch you at that point. That is the end of 25%, your first act. That's going to launch them into that middle act. So when you think 25%, think about how many words you're going to write. Let's just say my 100,000 word books, I know by 25,000 words, this is where I've got to be. It comes inherent to me now. I know that once I've written so many chapters, I've got to be at a certain point. But there's nothing wrong with setting your chapters up on a piece of paper and mark 25% is, say, chapter 5, so that you know where you need to be. Know your word count, your chapter count, and estimate where this point is in your story. So there's Act 1. There's Act 1. So it's a lot of responsibility, but that's the momentum. That's where the momentum of the story gets started. So let's go to Act 2. The Act 2 is called Figuring Things Out. Okay? That's the middle 50% of the story. This is where most stories fail. This is where most stories get sluggish, and this is where they fall short. Your protagonist has a choice. They've about decided they need to take it at the end of the first act. They're embracing the challenge and they start setting a plan. It's always the wrong plan. Okay, you don't want them to figure it out to start off with. Otherwise, it wasn't much of a challenge. So it's the wrong plan. She may not even know the whole problem. She may not know all the clues. She may not even know all the players. But she at least is embracing that she's going to move forward with it. She may be tentative. She may be angry, scared. She may be drinking gin at every chance to weather herself through it. You're going to flesh out your character as to why this is difficult for her. So it's not just this task is hard, mentally and emotionally it's hard. So it gives you lots of opportunity to flesh out your character. But she's going to fail. And she's going to become more flawed and even more vulnerable. You know, she's taking on the task and she's going to take a beating because of it. And it doesn't matter what genre you're in. This is what makes for good storytelling. She reaches a point where she really doesn't know what to do because everything she's touched has failed. You have what's called a midpoint reversal in the middle of this. An unexpected thing happens that changes her perspective and plan. Everything she's done probably hasn't been 100% committed, or it's based on what all she knows, and none of it has worked. So there's going to be this point where she gets a whole new perspective, new clues, there's a new situation, things shift, whatever, and she goes, I need a different plan than this. This isn't working. Think of every movie you've ever been to, and that's what happens. This should be about the halfway point of the book. The stakes raise up. The danger is worse. The risk-taking is steeper. You could even have a new problem arise, a new secret, new clues that are going to require her to make new sacrifice. Okay, we think of any story and movie, and I guarantee you can spot these points. There needs to be an all is lost moment. Also, a dark self-analysis moment. That's where the character goes, I cannot do this. I do not see how I'm going to handle this. All is lost. They're wanting to give up. But guess what? If they give up, it gets worse. They are in this moment where they're looking at themselves in the mirror going, I don't know what to do. Think in Top Gun, when Tom Cruise has lost his flying partner, I don't know the proper name, Goose, who has died, and he's now alone. He doesn't know what to do, and he is literally in a bathroom looking in the mirror at himself, giving up. That is the epitome of an all is lost dark moment in a book. That's it. That defines it. That's the kind of thing you want, where your character is bruised and battered and lost and nothing is working, and yet people are dependent on her, or the world is dependent on them, or their children, or humanity, the government, some viral holocaust, whatever it is, it's on their shoulders, and they think they can't do this. But something is going to trigger them to have to. At the 75% mark, right at the end of that, I've got 25, 50, 25. At the end of that 50 is the 75% mark. Hope I'm not messing with you with the math. That's your disaster. That is your disaster. Everything goes wrong, often because of what the protagonist did to that point. She caused part of the problem. She feels worse than ever. The stakes rise again. It's almost too much to handle. All lies are stripped away. Things she believed in are stripped away. Maybe even her culture, her self-esteem. Her mentor may not be who she thought he was. The reader may learn who the bad guy is, or if it's already known, some new quirky advantage that the antagonist has. To succeed, the protagonist realizes she must face the problem head on. That is at your 75% mark. And you may think it shouldn't be quite as structured as this, but you take most of the books on your bookshelf and you open them 3/4 of the way through and you read, and I guarantee you within 5 pages either way, you're going to see this point. That leads us into Act 3. It's facing the bad guy. It's the last 25% of the story. The character has gone into the new plan. I want to let you know that this plan could never have been thought of or developed without having failed at all these other plans. They can't function with this new plan if they haven't been flawed and screwed up to now. It's new knowledge, it's new person, it's new emotions, it's aha moment. So that is how they create that plan. They dig deep and they're finding that new plan using everything they've learned in this journey. They're stronger internally and they're ready to tackle the situation, even to the point of, I'll die doing it. You know those moments, I know you do. The plan that they're going to do needs to be clever. The reader has been riding along with you and trusting you up to this point. At that point, it's got to be a clever plan. Don't make it predictable. Sometimes the details of the plan are secret until the climax, until they pull out the secret power, or they pull out that little piece of knowledge they have been holding on to that nobody else knows, or some new tool. But it can even be secret, like I said, and they just wait until it's head-to-head, their meeting, that they pull it out and you go, I should have seen that. Oh, that's cool. You know you got to have those cool moments. But don't be afraid to let even that plan fail. You know when you get into a movie or a book, especially now that we're on Kindles and Nooks and things, you read into this and there's a climax and everything has hit the fan and you're watching this thing play out and you think that they've won, and you look down like at the bottom of my Kindle and I go, you're only 80% through this book, and I go, oh, there's something else coming. You know, when you're, or you're reading the book and you go, wow, that was exciting, and you go, God, there's 30 pages left here. So that's what I'm saying. Then you're going to come back where that plan maybe didn't quite work, or there's another twist that's going to come down the pike that's going to raise the stakes even more. That's got to be solved too. Your readers are very, very sophisticated now. It can't just be a problem, obstacle, solve it, bingo, good guy. That's old school. Now you've got to have solve this problem. Whoa, that didn't fix it. That made it worse. Well, let's solve this one. Whoa, that didn't work either. They like twists and turns, and you've got to give it to them. But what is important about your character in the middle of all this? They've grown. At this point, when they're doing this major plan and carrying it through, maybe having to come up with a second one, your character has grown so much and is willing to risk everything. They're thinking on their feet. They're not having to sit down and go, I think I'll do this first and this second and this third. No. They're having to think on their feet. They're shrewder, they're smarter, they're more daring, they're willing to take more risk, and that makes the scene all that much more exciting. All this is taking place in your last 25%. And in that climax, you have the showdown. The protagonist knows the answer to everything. They realize they've grown. They wouldn't have this answer if they hadn't grown. And it makes the confrontation all the more possible. And their personal issues, remember that. I said there's subplots. They always have something mental going on in their life, one of those other balls that's being juggled in the air. That has to conflict. They may even stop and go, I'll lose my husband if I do this. Or, my children will turn against me forever. Or this is going to kill a third of the U.S. instead of all of the U.S. Which part am I going to choose? You're raising stakes to where this is one last huge stake. And their personal issues and their personal thoughts about it all can get in there and muddle things up to the point they have to go, no, I've got to do this or I've got to do that. But it's where the personal issues, the subplot crosses with the main plot, and they're clashing right there. And she's got to make decisions in hopes of solving in favor of the masses instead of the one type of thing. So in your climax, one, your protagonist must meet your antagonist. Your protagonist must show that he has changed into somebody new. You must have a twist, and you must show sacrifice. It's that simple, regardless of the genre. Then at the end of that 25%, you must have a wrap-up. That is often one of the most understated and poorly written parts of a book, and readers hate it. Your wrap-up has to be good. It has to, any little stray clues have to be wrapped up. Any little stray logic has to be wrapped up. Any relationships have to be wrapped up, unless you're, of course, writing a trilogy or something. There has to be a really good sense of closure. And even if you have a trilogy, you need to have some little piece of closure for it to tide the reader over until they get the next book. To me, one of the biggest flaws of The Lord of the Rings was the way the Fellowship and the Towers ended, because they left you hanging, totally hanging. And it was blatantly obvious it should have been just one big story, but it was too long. Nowadays, readers get pretty mad about that. So you want, even though it's a series, each book in the series to end on a sense of closure. So that is plotting in a nutshell. I'm going to give you some ideas of hooks on some ways to maybe tweak your story. I'm going to hit those pretty quick. Hooks are fun, and they're not just at the beginning of a book. They need to be at the beginning, but they don't have to be there. And the best way to get a reader to love your work is to plant hooks throughout the story, especially if they're at the end of every single chapter. Nothing will make a reader stay up all night than to put a hook at the end of every single chapter. But you need an overall story hook. What's different about your overall story? I'll give you some ideas. Benjamin Button. The story of Benjamin Button was a huge hook, where a character is born an old man and instead of aging gets younger throughout his life. Okay, when you see that opening that he's born an old man, you got to know how this turns out. Take a slant on an old idea. Wicked. What is Wicked? A spin off The Wizard of Oz from the witch's standpoint. You want things that will draw a reaction and raise curiosity. Signs, the Mel Gibson movie Signs. You know, you're anchored in reality, and then you throw aliens and cornfields. Your protagonist hook, you want your character to be unique. They can have special powers, say the Avengers, unusual personality, Poltergeist, unexpected abilities, Sherlock Holmes. Define your character, your main character, make them special. You already know you need a core conflict, you need a theme. Setting can really be nice if you can make that hook in. And if your story doesn't feel unique enough, throw a twist. What if the South won the war? What if superheroes turned criminal? What if apes became the ruling species? Any of these sound familiar? What if the villains have to save the day? What if there was an urban Huckleberry Finn? What if Cinderella was told through the frustrations of the fairy godmother? You can take all of these old school stories, put a twist, make them contemporary, and run with them. So that's a lot. That's plotting. I could go on and on with it. It's difficult, but it's fun. It's probably the most satisfying part of the book that you will face. And there's a reason for that, because that is what's going to hook a reader. Characters are a close second. But if a reader gets into a story and can't follow it, doesn't feel the stakes are high enough, they're not going to read it. So plotting is intricate, but it can be fun and, like I said, extremely satisfying. So I hope some of these tools help you out in your journey. Thank you.